All right, welcome to part 2 of our 2020 season wrap-up. We've talked about the organizers' choices in part 1 of this. This time we're going to talk about the Index of Affluency this year. Now, if you're new to Lemons, the Index of Affluency is our top prize, which pays out more than the other prizes by an entire $1, and goes to the team that we kind of subjectively think does the most with the least. Generally speaking, that's a lot of really terrible cars, as we're about to see. We opened this year at Barber Motorsports Park, as we have for several years, and the IOE at that first race went to Team No Naked Tires and their Ford Pinto. Pretty basic way to start the year with a slow, ugly, basically a normal Ford Pinto that just kind of ran around and around. Wasn't fast, didn't have to be. It beat a whole bunch of teams. And it kind of came in direct opposition to the other Ford Pinto at the race.
Then it was on over to Arizona, and Indy went to a mid-engine supercar. What can I say? This was Team Gate Crashers. The mother of one of the team members bought this car brand new in 1991. It's a rare variant. 5-speed all-track. It's basically a Nissan GTR. Had a similar spec sheet to a Nissan GTR, 138 horsepower, 3,600 pound curb weight. This particular one also had 250,000 miles, but surprisingly, the drivers were okay. They were kind of hustling this thing around the track. Their team organization and the decent enough driving got this thing into 29th place overall, which was a very impressive result, even for a mid-engine supercar. It was a slam dunk IOE.
Oh man, this is actually going to be, the belts are going to get in the way, even worse. Oh no. Oh man. This thing just comes off. 2TZ, no shit.
Next up on the schedule was NOLA Motorsports Park, New Orleans, one of my favorite places in the world. I was super excited to go, had plans to go to a concert on the Friday night before the race, and then
heightened states of emergency across the nation as a number of coronavirus cases soars above 3,000.
Now, of course, eventually we were able to go back racing safely, and that comeback race was at Gingerman in Michigan. And Michigan, we always get really great American cars, and this was no exception. Our IOE was a Plymouth Valiant, a 72, and like the Previa, had been bought brand new by one of the team members' parents. This was his dad's car for decades. Pretty basic transportation, column shifted automatic 318. Really nothing else to it. They put a roll cage in it, they drove it to the racetrack from Indiana, raced it all weekend, drove it home, showed up at 2 more races for the rest of the year. Fantastically done. The Gorilla Greasers absolutely nailed it.
Our next IOE winner was at The Ridge, and it went to Russ Passwald and Piston Liberation Front. This is the 59 Jaguar Mark I. Incredible vehicle. It's sort of this Mark I shell grafted on top of later XJ drivetrain. There's a giant doghouse sheet metal cover, sort of in the passenger footwell. The engine is over there, the transmission is over there. Nobody knows what's happening under that thing, but somehow the car moves and runs under its own power. This car had a Harvey Norman theme, which is an Australian-based retailer of furniture, bedding, and consumer electrical products. It's kind of like an Australian Walmart. Now, Mike Harrell, obscure car owner and Lemons racer and Lemons helper up there in the Pacific Northwest, he made an astute comment. He said, if everybody gets your theme, it's too mainstream. If nobody gets it, it's too obscure. If literally one person gets it, it's perfect. Harvey Norman, perfect.
That's not a theme. That's a theme.
It had some Jag problems, alternator, terrible handling, transmission stuck in third gear, but this is a variation of the hat car, a car wearing another car as a hat, which is a car that we love to see in Lemons. It's an incredible machine. It completed some laps, which was more than enough to qualify for the IOE.
Speaking of hat cars and even 1959 hat cars, we headed over to Thompson where the 1959 Sunbeam Rapier won the IOE under the team name Roots of All Evil, which is great. This car was mostly Ford Pinto underneath. The team had bought it as an empty shell with some weird 1980s 300ZX suspension partially put on it. They threw all that away, made it Ford Pinto, ran all weekend, beat a whole bunch of teams, looked spectacular, and pretty much prompted everybody in the paddock to try to describe it, and none of them had any idea what it was, which again is a great way to go Lemons racing. If nobody knows what your car is, that's actually about perfect. After Thompson, we had our double 24 weekend where we had two 24-hour races in the same weekend. Just a brilliant idea on our part that wasn't overextending any of our resources or anything like that. The first of those started at Carolina Motorsports Park in South Carolina, and the IOE went to a car that was not old, not hacked up, and really not changed at all from the way it left a Buick dealership in 1996. That was the Semisentient Centenarians in a Buick Century. This thing was absolutely spectacular, had the GM sound of power. And then the 4-speed overdrive automatic that would always kick down to third gear and stay there no matter what you did. In spite of that, the car ran way better than it had any right to. It was kind of quick-ish and, had plenty of body roll. It was spectacular. It was the last model year of a car that had been built unchanged for 15 years. That's a great way to go Lemons racing as well, to chase an IOE. Well done, Semisentient Centenarians.
And the second full 24-hour race in the same weekend was over there in Colorado at High Plains Raceway. IOE was awarded to Ran Out of Talent Racing, and in GeoMetro obviously an IOE contender. This particular team was run by two people, a father and son, for an entire 24-hour race. This GeoMetro was pretty stock. It just kept running and running and running. Towards the end, it broke an axle. They didn't give up. They welded the axle directly to the hub. It had some balance issues, but somehow lasted for another couple of hours before completely exploding. But by then, they had racked up more than enough laps to win the IOE. And then just a couple of weeks later, they brought that same car down to Buttonwillow and raced it there. So incredible effort by Ran Out of Talent Racing, went above and beyond to win the IOE, and we look forward to seeing this team and this car in the future.
From High Plains, we went west to Buttonwillow Raceway in California's Central Valley. Beautiful location. Just one of the most picturesque places you can go racing.
Smells good, too.
This IOE went to LaCitron, which is a Pontiac Le Mans. Perfect car for Lemons. These guys have been absolutely beating the hell out of this car in Lemons for 7 years. Have gotten pretty much nowhere. They finally got it to run with whatever small block GM V8 is in it. We don't even know. It doesn't really matter. It runs poorly all the time. It ran most of this race on, somewhere between 5 and 7 cylinders. Still beat a bunch of teams. Kind of a lifetime achievement IOE for them. Really well done. And again, Pontiac Le Mans at Lemons. What more could you need?
And then it was back to Michigan and Gingerman Raceway, where Brown Rubber Soul Racing won the IOE with their Mazda 626. Now, this is an early rear drive Mazda 626. Why you rude classic. This car has a crazy backstory. We won't get into all of that here. Team captain Mark Johns drove this car on the street to Gingerman from Cleveland, Ohio. It ran about as strongly as the 75 or so horsepower would allow. It beat a whole bunch of teams, looked damn good doing it in its brown on brown tritone paint scheme. The team had another car at the race, a Ford Probe, big performance upgrade. That car won Class B. the Mazda 1 IOE. Now, after the race, Mark attempted to drive it home, but the wheel bearing that had been slowly failing since before he left in the first place finally reached its limits of engineering. It had 2 inches of death wobble. He made it to northern Indiana, ditched the car at a teammate's house there. Maybe it got home eventually, maybe it didn't, but for the race purposes, it won the grand prize.
After Gingerman, we headed to New Hampshire Motor Speedway in Loudon, New Hampshire, where Oscar's Junk Heap and AMC Javelin, why you ruin classic, won IOE. Now, this is a team that's been around since 2008. Manny Cochis and Chris Hassa. They've run everything from a Saturn to a Rover P6. They thought, man, we need some American muscle. And a Javelin is kind of that. They have beat on this thing with hammers. They have rewired it. They have done pretty much everything to just make it run a little bit. It finally ran an entire weekend. Came up just short of a Nissan Access for Class C. Couldn't beat a mid-90s minivan. Oh well, they still finished 37th out of 100. That's pretty good for AMC.
Now, so far in 2020, the IOE has been awarded to things like Pintos and Javelins and Sunbeam Rapiers. At MSR Houston, there weren't that many interesting cars of that nature, so the IOE was awarded to a relatively normal Volvo 240. Now, what made this Volvo special? Well, like many Lemons efforts, it was mostly about the team and the backstory. This car was some high school kid's daily driver up until like last year, and it still had the high school parking permit in the windshield. These 2 guys saw Lemons on the internet, said, hey, I want to do that. And so they got this Volvo. They didn't change anything. They put the safety equipment in, didn't have a trailer, but they lived reasonably close to the track. They rope-towed it with a Ford Expedition probably belonging to one of their parents. And then they just drove around and around. It wasn't very quick. It had lots of body lean, but they never visited the penalty box. They were cool to everybody. They had a smile on their face the entire weekend. The whole thing just really embodied the grassroots spirit of how you can participate in Lemons. You don't need to overthink it. They had a great result. Like I said, great attitude. Well deserving of the IOE. Now, that MSR Houston race turned out to be the 2020 season finale. We had some other races scheduled, but COVID had other plans for us. So that recaps all of the IOE winners for 2020. This is part 2 in the series. If you missed part 1, that's all of the org choice winners for 2020. And next week in part 3, we are going to go over the season champions for 2020. So stay tuned for that. Whoa!